Well, let me remind you what time it is. It's time for the bookshelf. Today, we are looking at The Promise of Memory by Michael Weeder. This publication is a collection of poems about the author's daily experiences, both good and bad. To unpack this book further, I'm joined by eNCA Bookshelf Club member Ayesha Ismail and the author himself, Michael Weeder, coming live to us from our Cape Town studios. Thank you very much, guys, for your time. Dean Weeder, I'm going to start with you. There's a poem that you start with in the book that I feel is probably a response to what was said in the introduction of the book by a person who says that you were once in the United Kingdom for a poetry type of event, and one Jamaican man was questioning your right to identify yourself as a black person. And then in that poem, the very first poem, you talk about I know where me from, and it's also got a lot of Jamaican type of accent in it.
Yeah, it was in 1982, and I was in Brixton in the company of a fellow South African, Eugene Skiff, and there was this interaction between this fellow, I think he was from the Caribbean, and he was very disparaging of my claim to blackness. And the poem was a kind of response to that. It took me a while, many years to formulate a response, because when I was in my early 20s, I had embraced the concept of blackness, but I had no real understanding beyond the political embrace of blackness, who I was genealogically, and in terms of beyond my political DNA and how apartheid had contoured my identity, the who of who I am had not been yet discovered and uncovered.
Tell the viewers a little bit about I know where me from. Some of the words that you use there, as you say that you didn't really know what it meant to identify as a black person, and it took you a while. But over here, you're telling that Jamaican man in response to what he was saying that you know where you're from and you know who you are.
Sure. Do you want me to read it to you?
You can, Dean. No problem.
Yeah. So I know where me from. No look like me familiar or you, maybe so, or maybe no. But I sure fit the shoe of me history, like they say, is longer than the gallows rope, but it the seed of me need that's stronger than the lion of Zion hope. I know where me from. I feel it in the bounce of a guma drum. Though I know not a place specifically, or me first given name genealogically, but I know where me from, under stormy dark sky or under the laughing sun. It's from here, or maybe over there, but I damn sure know I am ever near where them be black or brown, or honey and babes all around. That where me from is where love is strong and people get along, sharing the salt of life's misery, along with the heartache and the joy that make a little I and I a mighty we. That's where me from, is where people ever striving to stand free, like a many river flowing into one mighty sea. I know where me from.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dean, for the rendering of that poem. It's very important how you describe where you're from and how united the country is and a happy place, especially because in the 1980s, at the time you were in Brixton, we were not so together in the country. But I'm going to bring in my colleague, Ayesha Ismail. Ayesha, I read a lot of the poems. I have my own favorites. Which one was yours?
Well, I think there are quite a few, so, but I think the ones that stand out for me would definitely be Lent and Ash, as well as A Letter to My Father. But I must say also that I like how the writer is so confident within himself to talk about his life and his life experiences without being bothered by political correctness. And, you know, memory is so important, especially during these turbulent political times. And as you say, you also, you know, initially talked about I know where me from, and that is exactly where Dean Michael Weeder talks about, you know, where he is from, his background, his culture, and the fact that, you know, in his poetry book, he manages to cross boundaries of race and gender and culture and creed so beautifully.
I want to talk specifically about the one that you just mentioned, Ayesha, because that was also one of my favorite ones, the ones to your father, Dean. It says, a letter to my father, and you speak about the guilt of possibly not being able to recognize him, I think after seeing him for years because your parents divorced when you were 7.
Yeah, my dad is my connection to Cape Town, to an area of the city called District 6, which is now the Cape Quarter, quite literally the entrance to the waterfront. And he was a dark-skinned man. In Cape parlance, he would be called a Madras Moor. The more African version of that would be Masbikari. But so when we ended up being moved out of District 1 and coming to a place called Kensington, going through the divorce papers, I saw that my dad had actually driven my mom and my siblings out of the house on the 10th of October, and I think in 1964, and that is pretty much the last time that I saw him. But we were separated by maybe a 10-minute car journey between Kensington and where I grew up, in a place called Elsie's River. And I remember coming home one day, my mom, at the age of 17, I was in matric. My mom said that your dad is very ill, and I was quite stunned, you know, connecting me as a teenager with a father. And the poem kind of arises out of many years of an alienation from the concept of fatherhood. But then I became a father, and I then had to kind of try to internalize without judging my father. The poem came out of that.
I think that's very important, because you do say even in the poem that, you know, you went through some guilt of possibly not recognizing who he was, and as soon as you arrived at the hospital, the nurse just told you and your mother that he had died. So it's very important what you say, Dean, I think, with being able to reflect yourself as an adult, but also not blame those who came before you, but learn from their mistakes. I want to bring
Sure.
the Kwezi, the one you wrote about Kwezi. We all know by now who Kwezi was. And I think the specific lines that caught my eye, Ayesha, I don't know about you if you went through it. It's the part where he says, your testimony ashamed us for entrusting the shield of the nation to the premeditating violator of your trust and the truth, and of truth. I think here, Dean, how I interpreted it was that the shame of us entrusting the shield of the nation speaks to the courts, I think, who protected the premeditating violator of her trust, which of course was the former president, who was eventually found not guilty of the allegations.
Yeah. I just happened to be traveling with Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu at that time, and we had just flown in from Indonesia and were awaiting a connecting flight to further into the U.S. from, I think, Miami, I'm not quite sure. And I remember his immense sadness, which at that time I couldn't connect with, when the verdict came out. And over the years, I've revisited that scene of our elder in so many ways in the cause of freedom and for a greater way of being human in our land. How he embraced the kind of stalwart courage of Kwezi. And the poem is a kind of salute to her dignity and her undying fire. Despite the many odds against her, she held her ground. And the poem wants to celebrate that.
Ayesha, I want to also talk to you about the one titled Colored Girls. It describes colored girls as this dangerous, this dangerous part of the human species, people who have guns in their bags, but who will love you, until you disappoint them. You, for instance, I've seen, you've covered quite a lot of stories. South Africa, still has that issue in terms of so-called colored communities still feeling as though they are, not involved in inclusion as we move forward as a country.
That's exactly true, Masejo, and that is why I said, I like the way that the dean was able to talk so freely and openly about his coloredness and about his colored lived experiences. He talks about colored women in his book, but at the same time, it is not. It's not talked about in a derogatory way. It's a way you read it. I mean, I, as a person who identifies as colored, I looked at that poem and I actually smiled as I read it. I did not feel, as I said, it wasn't derogatory or anything. And then, of course, where he talks about patkos, colored by history, he talks about hair. And of course, in the colored community, hair is still a very, a big thing. You are frowned upon when you're walking around with hair that's big and frizzy. And I just want to read, Masejo, if you allow me to, the bit where he talks about the swirl coast, and often jokes are being made about, the fact that you are not colored if you don't know what a swirl coast is. Now, I'm not sure if you know what a swirl coast is, Masejo, but it's just so interesting how the dean was able to talk about, and it's in the poem called O Sisters of the Land, and he talks about your hair is the crown of your gorgeous glory, the facts of the pain of your untold story, like when the swirl coast kringle cuts, unsmooths as the day goes kaplats. Now, again, it's the dean's lived experience. It's what he experienced, as he talks about as a child, also writes about during the 80s up until recently. So it's a book that I think that, every person needs to read because memory is so important, especially now during these turbulent political times in South Africa.
Absolutely, Ayesha. I mean, I would like you to explain to me exactly what did you say, a Swiss roll?
No. It's a swirl coast.
Swirl
so
coast, okay.
A swirl coast. So unfortunately, I do not have one here.
Is it a comb?
You take. No, it's a pair of stockings. So you cut off so that you have the foot part. And you then have to swirl your hair and sleep with the swirl coast on your hair. So when you get up in the morning, your hair is flat.
Ah, all right. Okay, I think we also do that, actually. Yes, Dean, I think you just want to explain it further?
Yeah, I was going to say there is a lexicon at the back part of the poem, of the collection, and there is the definition of a swirl coast, very elegantly described as a night bonnet made from nylon pantyhose used to keep hair straight while sleeping. But can I just respond to the colored girls thing, where I say as a footnote, anybody who self-identifies as colored in terms of the experiences detailed here, because I don't want to also be seen as a kind of celebrant of colored nationalism, because I conclude here that if you are from Phoenix or Wentworth, New Brighton, Orlando, Mamelodi, feel at home with what is laid on here. And then I conclude and I say, Jose Marti, the Cuban patriarch, said in his time, there is only one motherland, and that is the human race.
Definitely. I was actually going to say that, you do say that whoever wants to identify as a colored girl can use that poem and identify themselves with it. But I want to talk about what you said in the poem about Steve Biko giving a message to priests about when you preach. Yeah,
don't just focus on, as in my profession, what people do, the sins of our Friday night and our Saturday night sins, but you're silent about, on a Sunday, when you preach, you're silent about the sin of allowing yourself to be oppressed. He actually said that. And when somebody shared that, it blew my mind, and it just gave me another take on this wonderful liberation theologian that Steve Biko was, our own homegrown Frantz Fanon, because of the way he and his generation, I think he was the face of a certain vanguard of humanizing of the oppressed, and a sector of the oppressed were told that they were non-people, but just the way religion played a part in compelling us to turn the other cheek, you know, and to be silent to what has been done to us. The Biko thing about Bafundisi speak about the sin of allowing yourself to be oppressed.
Dean, we do have to wrap up soon, so I'm just going to ask you, what are you reading right now?
I'm reading something that my spouse gave me yesterday about the trial of Cecil John Rhodes. And she gave it to me as I was having a beans curry, so I was quite distracted. But it's about, you know, it's a mock trial where Cecil John Rhodes has to give account of how they stole the land and all those who associate with that international crime against African people on this continent.
Thank you very much, Dean, for your time, as well as my colleague and eNCA Bookshelf Club member, Ayesha Ismail. This is the book that we were reviewing today. It's called The Promise of Memory by Dean Michael Weeder. Thank you very much for that.